And we continue looking ahead of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's 2024 medium-term budget speech in Cape Town on Wednesday. We've now roped in Matshidiso Lencoasa, who's the chairperson of the Budget Justice Coalition and budget analyst at Section 27, to further preview analysis of the medium-term budget policy statement. So, Matshidiso, thank you so much for your time in coming to studio this afternoon. Welcome. So, let's talk about your op-ed, nicely titled Rights Before Cuts, the GNU's Budget Imperative. What exactly are you criticizing there, just for the benefit of our viewers?
Firstly, thank you so much, first of all, for having us. This upcoming medium-term budget speech, so the mini budget, is one that's hotly anticipated because it's the first sort of budget for the GNU. And the last time we had a budget during February, it was a different administration. And so the mini budget we generally anticipated because it proposes some adjustments to the budget to better reflect the priorities of government. And now we obviously have a coalition government, and so we're looking forward to seeing what their priorities really are. The past few years have been quite disappointing when it comes to the budget because there have been fewer resources available for education, for healthcare, for social development, and this has caused, this has meant that impoverished people are struggling even more in this harsh economic time. And so we're really calling on this new government, and they're talking about unity, to do more than their campaign promises and to actually just create or propose a budget and adjustments to the budget that reflect that they actually care about the human rights of the people in this country.
And then gauging by what we've seen in terms of the new administration being installed, Matshidiso, the various portfolios are now headed by the different groups that actually make up the government of national unity. Are you content with the leadership that is at the helm in ensuring that all these policies are actually implemented for the betterment of South Africans?
Yeah, so I think for us as civil society, it's a waiting game. So especially from the economic justice side, this is the first form of a budget. So we will actually be judging and their views or judging their position and their ability to lead in this harsh economic outlook, seeing how they're going to be able to mobilize sufficient resources to realize education, health, and social development. So we will try, to be, I'm an optimistic person by nature, so trying to be optimistic and hoping that they actually rise to the occasion, because right now more than ever do we need that as a country.
But Matshidiso, there's a stark contrast in this, because as much as we're discussing the issue of the excitement around the formation of the GNU, we've also seen, I think you also went into great lengths in highlighting it in your op-ed, the issue around the Bella Bill, the NHI, and overall human rights, which I applaud, because yet again, speaking to the GNU, these pieces of legislation have been contested by some of the main partners within the GNU. So how do you foresee these actually being ironed out going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Some of the legislation proposals are stuff that civil society has supported. So, for instance, we support universal
and it's been in the pipeline for quite some time.
Exactly. So, it's true. And we've engaged in Parliament on this as well for many, many years. So you're right, it has been in the pipeline for long. So, for example, the Bella Act now, it's no longer the Bella Bill. This is something that civil society has proposed because it could propose interventions towards education realization that could lower the barriers that many learners, especially those in marginalized communities, have.
Yes.
Exactly. But unfortunately, if we have a budget that reduces the budget towards education, how do we actually implement this Bella Bill, this Bella Act? It's the same thing with the NHI Act. So, I mean, civil society is, of course, in support of universal health coverage. That doesn't necessarily mean NHI, for instance, but that's one intervention towards it. But it's hard to see how we can have this scaling of universal healthcare coverage, but at the same time we're cutting the budget towards getting rid of mud clinics, for instance, that still plague the country. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of contestation, but ultimately we'll know the truth behind all of the political games when we see the budget. Like, what are their actual priorities? What are they willing to put money behind?
You know, Matshidiso, I don't know if you saw the clips that were actually preceding our interview. I mean, it was a lot about workers, and of course workers bearing the brunt of ensuring that the economy is sustainable in this country. But the issue is that there's just not many people that are actually employed in this country. So juxtaposed to that, as well as the fact that a lot of labor unions have just recently drawn a sharp criticism about the fact that they've not been seen at the forefront actually fighting for the implementation and enforcement of those policies that are going to eradicate some of these issues pertaining to some of the issues. Because if we solve issues that are pertaining to the workers, half of our problems are sorted, right? So let's talk about the criticism about those labor unions that have seemingly not been at the forefront of labor policies pertaining to issues like, we're looking at the two-pot system. A lot of people have actually criticized it and said, but in actual retrospect, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Sure. So I think that trade unions are in an interesting time because South Africa's unemployment rates are so
sky high.
Yeah, they're really, really high. And so once upon a time, I think that what was for the workers is what was for the country. But the majority of people in this country, especially young people, are not working at all. And so I do think that it is a good thing that there's a mixture of voices. Yes, we need trade union voices at the forefront because they are still workers, and many of whom are still being exploited today, which is highly concerning. And so there is an urgent need to hear from trade unions. And many times we do hear, especially now we're hearing about their protest ahead of the medium-term budget speech, you know. But also I think that this extends not just to trade unions. We really all have to come together, stakeholders and people in this country, to make this country work, you know. Civil society also needs to be at the forefront because many times we represent clients and people, you know, everyday people who are struggling with the system, and their voices are not heard because they're not employed, so they cannot be heard by trade unions, for instance, or anything.
They're not contributing to the system. Yeah,
and surprisingly, they actually are contributing through taxes and everything, but their contributions are not recognized because there's no one speaking on behalf of the silenced majority in this country. And so I guess the answer to this is that we really need an all of society response to this.
So what are you expecting from the midterm budget speech there, and what are some of your proposals as, of course, the organization, Matshidiso?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to take it on a more optimistic note.
Absolutely.
We are really hoping to see a human rights budget in the upcoming medium-term budget speech. So this mini budget, we're hoping to see, first of all, that there have been human rights impact assessments that have been applied. So if there are budget cuts, for instance, which have been spoken about regarding education budgets, we hope to see that government has some interventions to ensure that any progress that has been made in education will not be regressed because of these budget cuts. And if they're going to cut the budget in this way, they're still going to uphold the human right to basic education or healthcare or whatever it is in another way. So that's the first thing that we're looking at. We're looking forward to a gender-responsive budget because many of the issues or the way that budget cuts have overlooked the impact that it has had on gender inequality in this country, which we've spoken quite a bit about as civil society, so I won't have to go into it so much now. So we are looking for a budget that reflects that, you know, in this country, yes, austerity affects us all, but we're affected differently. And how can we use our fiscal policy to even redress issues like gender-based violence, for instance? And then, of course, we're looking forward to a budget that... So currently we have, you know, like we've been speaking about the unemployment that's been an issue, and we really need to get, you know, the formal economy. We need to basically get our economy going again so that we can create more meaningful jobs, gainful employment, so we can eradicate poverty, and so we can actually redress inequality. So we're looking forward to a budget that actually is ambitious enough to put, you know, that government is saying, okay, let's actually address the problems that this country is facing, and let's go head on when it comes to these problems.
Very interesting point there. I heard, in fact, one of the union representatives there, Matshidiso, saying that inflation is actually not concerned about unemployment. So whether or not you are employed, how it affects you, really, inflation does not care. Matshidiso, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for that valuable input. That is Matshidiso Lencoasa, the budget analyst from Section 27.